And so what is Obama doing at the National Action Network convention with confidential informant number 7 Sharpton? What do you think he's doing? He's race baiting. That's what NAN is all about. That's what Sharpton's all about. And quite frankly, that's what so much of Obama's all about. The Voting Rights Act. May I ask a question? This is a real question. Somebody been denied voting in this country because of their race? Who is it? What's their name? Is there one person? 10? 1,000? Who are they? Where are they? Do you know under the Voting Rights Act that the Supreme Court did not overturn, that aspect of the act still allows them to have a personal, individual cause of action under the Federal Voting Rights Act? So it's not as if there's no recourse. But I want to know who these people are who've been denied the right to vote. Where are they? Line them up. Tell us. They must be thousands and thousands of them because apparently this issue won't go away. And then what do? They reverse it. The voter ID. What's the purpose of the voter ID? Well, it's to stop minorities from voting. That's right, because you see, every proposal for a voter identification with a photo is a proposal that says only minorities must show it. Did you know that? Oh, yes, yes. Only minorities must show a photo ID. Whites don't have to. Did you know that? Of course not. It's ridiculous. Everybody would be required to show a photo ID. And oh, they're so hard to come by. Oh, my God. So difficult. The same idiots that set up healthcare.gov. You ever go on there? Go on there. Take a look at it. Somehow, everybody can use that. The dumbest person in America, the poorest, the richest, but a photo ID. No, a photo. My God, am I going to get a photo ID? Here's Obama at the National Action Network today. Cut 9, go. Hello?
The right
Cut
to
9,
vote
go.
is threatened today in a way that it has not been since the Voting Rights Act became law nearly 5 decades ago. Across the country, Republicans have led efforts to pass laws making it harder, not easier, for people to vote.
Harder for people to vote. I get so disgusted listening to this guy. I get so disgusted with his demagoguery. Republicans want to make it harder for people to vote. Republicans want to make it harder for people who are not allowed to vote. Republicans want to clean dead people off the lists because they're not supposed to be voting either. Republicans want to make sure that people who move from state to state and are registered in 2 or 3 or 4 states don't vote 2 or 3 or 4 times. Republicans think the vote is so important, the franchise, to every single American, black, white, brown, red, what have you, that they don't believe your vote should be neutralized by a fraudulent vote. All Americans used to support this, except now. The Democrat Party has it as part of its political policy to promote election fraud. Absolutely. To promote election fraud. Because obviously they think it helps them. A photo ID. The Republicans are at it again. The Republicans have never been at it. That would be you guys, Obama, Holder, Sharpton. That would be your party. I can't wait for the day when this radical clown show is out of Washington, D.C., really. That's what this is. This is just so pathetic. You know, ladies and gentlemen, we the people in America, we are so stupid. We can't even get a photo ID. Now, they're ubiquitous as a result of demands by the government to get into buildings, to get on airplanes, to buy booze, to do this. But apparently we can't get them to vote because we're too stupid. Let me ask you something, Barack Obama. All these stupid people who are incapable of getting photo IDs, who did they vote for? I mean, they had to know to go to the polls. How did they find the polling places? Yeah, where's an address? What's an address? What's a poll? What's a ballot? I don't know. What's a photo ID? You buying this, ladies and gentlemen? Because there he is again. With Sharpton. Cut 10, go.
Now, I want to be clear. I am not against reasonable attempts to secure the ballot. We understand.
Stop. No, you are. Yes, you are. A photo ID is a reasonable attempt to secure the ballot. You know, it's much more reasonable than going to healthcare.gov to get health insurance, isn't it? Go ahead.
There has to be rules in place. But I am against requiring an ID that millions of Americans don't have. That shouldn't suddenly prevent you from exercising your right to vote. The first words put to paper in our American story tell us that all of us are created equal.
Ah, boy. Rambling buffoon. That's right, I said it. Rambling buffoon. I don't mind reasonable rules, but that photo ID, that's clearly unreasonable. Why? Well, millions of people don't have it. Well, they need to get it. And they can get it for free. Under every one of these proposals, it's a free photo ID. Now, ladies and gentlemen, unlike Obama, I actually know something about this subject. The Landmark Legal Foundation's been involved in litigation on this subject and assisting others with litigation on this subject. And every time the plaintiffs go in front of a judge or a panel of judges, they have difficulty finding an individual in the entire country who would be unable to obtain a free photo ID if a state were to provide it. And they come up with these cockamamie arguments. Well, what if you're really, really old and you're bound to your home? Well, somebody will bring it to them. Well, I mean, what if they don't open the door? But Obama's not interested in that. Obama has been demonstrated time and time again, a serial liar. Now, I know Hank Aaron will be upset. I know I say this as a white person, but the fact is he is. Facts are facts. And he goes to Al Sharpton's little organization that doesn't pay its taxes to stand next to Al Sharpton, who's behind in his taxes, CI number 7, and rambles on like this in order to upset people. Cut 11, go.
It is wrong to change our election rules just because of politics. It is wrong to make citizens wait for 5, 6, 7 hours just to vote.
Oh, that's precious. How about waiting 5, 6, 7 weeks to get health care on healthcare.gov? Is there something wrong with that? It's wrong to wait 5, 6, 7 hours to vote. Most people don't wait 5, 6, 7 hours to vote. And he knows it. So here you are, typical Lindsay Marxism. Cherry pick, tear down the country, define your opponents, quote unquote. They're about politics. They're about racism. They're about denying the vote. And all of this over a photo ID. So the photo ID must itself be a tool of racism, right? Because everybody who needs one can't get one. Well, then it's obvious that the FAA and the Department of Transportation and this administration is racist because you need a photo ID to get onto an airplane. And you need a photo ID to be on Amtrak. And you need a photo ID to get into a federal building. And you need a photo ID under the Patriot Act to get a bank loan. And you need a photo ID to get a lease. You need a photo ID to get a loan. You need a photo ID to get booze. And you folks in Colorado, you need a photo ID to get your pot. But when it comes to voting, it's racist. When it comes to everything else, it's common sense and it's compelled. I despise this administration and I despise these charlatans. I want to know which state in this country today is involved in systemic, widespread voter intimidation based on race. Which one is it? And where's the evidence? That's exactly what the Supreme Court said. Where's your evidence? Where's the evidence since the 1965 Voting Rights Act? So the government couldn't come up with any. The federal government couldn't come up with any. They didn't pass the test. And so you have demagogues like Obama and Holder running around talking about how the Voting Rights Act has been eviscerated, and they didn't present the court with any evidence that states are involved, any state, in systemic, widespread voter intimidation, voter obstruction, based on race, ethnicity, or anything else. They couldn't prove it. They couldn't show it. There isn't any. And if you're an individual, and there has in fact been some done to you specifically, or at least you believe so, you have a federal cause of action still under the 1965 Voting Rights Act. But you won't hear that from Obama. You won't hear that from Holder. Notice they don't say, come forward, bring your lawsuits, we will assist you. They don't do it because there aren't many. And this really is infuriating. The effort to tear down this country. It is obvious to me that the Democrat Party wants racial strife in this country. That's right, I said it. The Democrat Party wants racial strife in this country. Because it serves their electoral purposes the way it did in the 1860s, the way it did in the 1890s, the way it did in the 1950s and 60s, and the way it does today. Meanwhile, at the National Action Network, Bertha Lewis. Who's Bertha Lewis? Remember her, the disgraced former CEO of Acorn? Well, she said in part, those who oppose amnesty and support voter ID laws want to put in place a, quote, throwback, unquote, system that, quote, suppresses the vote and the rights of new citizens of this country, unquote, so they can have a, quote, South African apartheid type thing where the masters of the universe still rule. What kind of a demented mind and argument is this? Well, the same thing Pelosi said the other day. If you don't support amnesty, well, then it's just like supporting Japanese internment. What? And she went on, but that's not going to happen because we're not going to stand for it. You're not going to stand for what? South African apartheid? You're an idiot. You're a disgraced idiot, lady. No question about it. This is what's going on at Sharpton's National Action Network. They're busy chasing lies. They're busy fomenting, hate and jealousy. Starting with the President of the United States. You never thought a photo ID was so controversial, did you? Until you listened to the left and the Democrats. It's an amazing thing, isn't it? Oh, yes, yeah, just like a poll tax, just like a literacy test. Really? Well, then I guess we have poll taxes and literacy tests to get on airplanes. Don't we, Mr. President? You're TSA. And I'm not tearing down the people who work there. I'm obviously making a point. When that 7-Eleven cashier or that cashier at a grocery store in the states where they sell booze and so forth asks you for a photo ID, I think you should make the point. Barack Obama says that's racist. Eric Holder says that's like a poll tax. And I will not be discriminated against. The next time you try and go into a federal building, Social Security Administration, what have you, and they say, we need a photo ID, well, you better show it because you'll be arrested. But that said, you also have to point out, wait a minute. Obama and Holder specifically said a photo ID is racist. The ID itself is racist. Where's that audio where he goes into the millions? Which one is that, Mr. Producer? Let's see. Let's play cut, because this is just special. Cut 10, go.
Now, I want to be clear. I am not against reasonable attempts to secure the ballot. We understand that There has to be rules in place. But I am against requiring an ID that millions of Americans don't have.
All right, stop. Millions of Americans don't have a photo ID? Wow. Millions of Americans don't have a photo ID. So he's against requiring a photo ID to vote because millions of Americans don't have it. Then why aren't you against a photo ID to get on an airplane? Because millions of Americans don't have a photo ID for that either. Or why aren't you against a photo ID to come see the president? Because millions of Americans don't have that either. And let me say this, ladies and gentlemen, based on the logic of our great president, a man who will never release his transcripts, because I want to suggest to you they're not that great. If requiring a photo ID denies millions of Americans, mostly poor, mostly minorities, the right to vote. Just stick with me. Then requiring a photo ID to see the President of the United States in a public forum is racist. And it's not only racist, generally speaking, but it is aimed at keeping poor minorities away from the president. You get my point, Mr. Producer? If in fact it's poor people and minorities who can't get photo IDs, according to Obama, which means, it's bullcrap. But let's just play along. If poor and minorities can't get photo IDs, even though every one of these states says we'll give them to you for free, we'll deliver them in person, we'll make sure you get it. Well, not. Can't do that. Why? Well, you just can't. Well, then if you require that same photo ID with these millions of people don't have one to see the President of the United States and he says no, then he's discriminating against the poor and he's discriminating against minorities. I bet you at this very event, the National Action Network, where the President was speaking, where there is heightened security, and there should be, for crying out loud, I'll bet you needed a photo ID to get into that room to see the President of the United States talk about how it's racist, in essence, to have a photo ID. Wouldn't you guess, Mr. Producer? There's no question about it. And yet we all have to play along with this idiocy, with this insanity. Oh, okay. Well, you're right. And there's no evidence of fraud anyway, ladies and gentlemen. No evidence of fraud anyway. I've addressed this before. I've addressed it many times. I addressed it in the Liberty Amendments. You see, folks, it's hard to prove, particularly in a court of law, a negative. If you're not keeping track, and you don't know if people are voting legally because you haven't put the mechanism in place to ensure that they vote legally, how do you prosecute cases? So they prevent the compilation of information necessary, and then they say, see, you don't have the information. This is the trick. This is the argument. A federal judge addressed that, by the way. A federal judge addressed that in the case called Crawford versus Marion County Election Board. Writing for a panel in the U.S. Court of Appeals for the 7th Circuit in 2008, Judge Richard Posner. I don't particularly like this guy, but from time to time he makes a good point. And this case, by the way, was later upheld by the United States Supreme Court. Posner explained what we're dealing with. The form of voting fraud in which a person shows up at the polls claiming to be someone else, someone who has left the district or died too recently to have been removed from the list of registered voters, or someone who has not voted yet on Election Day. He says, without requiring a photo ID, there's little if any chance of preventing this kind of fraud because busy poll workers are unlikely to scrutinize signatures carefully and argue with people who deny having forged someone else's signature. And I might add on top of that, it's almost impossible to prove at that point because the presumption, the heavy presumption, the 90% presumption, is the vote is legit. And people are afraid to even ask for information. Judge Posner added, the absence of prosecutions is explained by the endemic under-enforcement of minor criminal laws, minor as they appear to the public and prosecutors, and by the extreme difficulty of apprehending a voter impersonator. He enters the polling place, gives a name that is not his own, votes, and leaves. If later it's discovered the name he gave is that of a dead person, no one at the polling place will remember the face of the person who gave the name, and if someone did remember it, what would he do with the information? Because the name is false. That's the point. The judge said one response to voting fraud, which has a parallel to littering, that is, somebody throws paper out of the door and you can't find out who it is, but it's there, somebody committed an offense. What do? Another crime, the perpetrators of which are almost impossible to catch, litterers, would be to impose a very severe criminal punishment for voting fraud. Another, however, is to take preventive action by requiring a photo ID. And what of the limited number of news reports of voter fraud? And yet last week we had a huge case of voter fraud. Evidence up the wazoo in North Carolina. I notice Obama didn't mention that at his meeting, at his speech at the National Action Network when he was standing next to CI7. He said that lacuna may reflect nothing more than the vagaries of journalists and other investigators' choice of scandals to investigate. So he's saying, basically, again, you're trying to have people prove a negative. Somebody votes under a false name. They don't have a photo ID. They lie about who they are, where they're from. They vote and they leave. How do you prosecute that? How do you prosecute that? That's his point. And the libs know this. They're not for the vote. They're for winning at all costs. That's what they're for. They're for winning at all costs. This woman going, oh, it's like apartheid in America. I mean, it's just the comments are intended to inflame and anger. And the President of the United States participates in this, like he's his community activist mentality. This is why the man hung out with heirs and others. This is who he is. This is what he is. Obamacare takes hold, all these centralized nationalist programs that they stick in place, and which will be firmly in place in the next 10 years if we don't have a convention of the states, quite frankly. They're going to have data on us, financial data, health data, whatever data they want. What are they going to argue then about a photo ID? I don't even understand the rationale. The logic, it's so preposterous. And yet this is the one big issue Obama keeps harping on because he knows that it's a throwback to 60, 70 years ago, 50 years ago. You know, it's amazing to me, a lot of us, whatever you call yourself, whatever your ancestry, we look back on there and we say, wow, we've really made progress. They won't let us. They keep pulling us back. No, we're racist. No, can't have a photo ID. No, you're just like the Klan. You just dress differently. No, and they just keep dragging us back. And as I say every time, I don't understand it. Most of the people coming across the border illegally will be minorities in this country. Just look at the schizophrenia of the left. On the one hand, these people want to come here. They want freedom. They love America. They just want to be part of the American dream. And then you go to the National Action Network. America sucks. America hates minorities. That's right. America just stinks. Except these people just want a piece of freedom and the market system. They want a job. They come to America because America has hope and opportunity. And then the next hour, yet it sucks and it hates it. You see my point? It's all about playing people, manipulating people. And if you read the first chapter of Ameritopia, you understand. You understand it anyway, but I get into it very deeply what's going on here. The goal, ladies and gentlemen, isn't any of these little particular issues they raise, whether it's the minimum wage, whether it's income inequality, whether it's fairness for women, that's not the purpose. The purpose is bigger than that. It's to destroy the individual. It's to put people into groups. It's to turn one group against another. Just to keep people at each other, keep them anxious, keep them frustrated, jealous, angry. So that the central government, in a relative hand of masterminds, can continue to impose their will. It's destructive of the civil society. It is destructive of individual liberty. And yet somehow, you notice the people who do this, these politicians in Washington, they get more and more powerful when they leave office. Well, let me ask you a question. Has there ever been a politician who left office and became poor? I think that's a fair question, Mr. Producer. In modern times, has there ever been a president who's left office and became poor? They all become extremely rich, don't they? And so do most senators who leave office, and so do most congressmen who leave office. They certainly aren't worse off. So they've had power like nobody else. They get wealthy like nobody else. They haven't produced a damn thing. They haven't advanced society 1 inch. And yet we're at each other's throats. We're talking about race. We're talking about things really that we have overcome in many respects.